Welcome to Cambridge Community Television, What We Should Know, coming to you from Cambridge, Massachusetts. You can see from this vantage point the inside of the studio. That's what it looks like looking out onto Massachusetts Avenue and down Main Street. A peaceful scene on a sunny day, about 60 degrees here in Cambridge, Massachusetts on Monday, the 24th of October, 2016. The image that you see through that window, people casually strolling along the sidewalks, automobiles driving along Massachusetts Avenue, a peaceful scene, MIT farther down the street, exactly at that level where the pedestrian is passing, or those pedestrians are passing down Main Street. The crisis that is taking place is not seen in the atmosphere. The fact that here in the United States, as a reflection worldwide, 2016 will be the first year in which the value of 400 parts of carbon dioxide per million is exceeded. This is a crisis of monumental proportion. It's not being talked about in the press. It's not being talked about by the candidates of the Democratic Party. It's not being spoken about by the Donald. It's not being spoken about by the two major ruling parties at all. It doesn't fit into their program. That's what we're going to be speaking about today, about what else does not fit into the Democratic or Republican program that is absolutely essential for us who inhabit the earth, who have to conduct our business, get our educations, raise our families, earn the money for our mortgages, pay the taxes which fund the government, who make continually massive mistakes, disrupting the lives of tens of millions of people throughout the world, making our lives here in the United States a total disaster when it comes to planning, when it comes to security, when it comes to programs designed for the well-being of the citizens of the United States. If it's education, if it's health and welfare, if it's good schools, if it's justice of any kind, if it's financial security, if it's family security, it is a disaster of massive and non-ending realities. We'll see that in today's program. Behind us is the word sun, recognizing the fact that this election, it's absolutely essential that the voting public of the United States create an alternative to the two-party system, which is ruled by an oligarchy of billionaires who now, through Citizens United, have been given by the Supreme Court, that treacherous institute, given the status of sainthood, that treacherous institute who continually makes decisions in interest of the ruling elites, who allow them the injustice of dominating the lives, intimately, the lives of hundreds of millions of individuals, 300 million here in the United States, and hundreds of millions elsewhere, due to the fact that the Supreme Court makes decisions which have massive consequences for peace and stability The example of this, one example of this, is the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows the United States to incarcerate hundreds of thousands of Americans permanently upon a suspicion brought forth by the military or the police or a politician. Not the conviction, simply the suspicion of subversive activities. In other words, an individual saying that they're socialist, that they believe that the system of the oligarchy of the United States is treacherous and against the interests of the population. It's the idea that free speech is endangered here in the United States by decisions made by the Supreme Court. For instance, in Citizens United, maintaining that individuals, that corporations have the same right as individuals in reference to free speech, in reference to the contributions to political parties. In fact, it gave the right for billionaires to give unlimited sources of money, secretly as well, to political parties to dominate American political systems. That's the crisis and the rise of Donald Trump. We've spoken about Trump in the past. There's been a massive exodus, justifiably so, through his actions, through his statements, through his sexism, through his racism, through his misogyny, his hatred of women, his treatment of women, his sexual conduct, misconduct. Donald Trump is a complete disaster, and the responsibility of this disaster lies squarely on the shoulders of the Republican Party. It is time to recognize that the Republican Party is a disaster, that it does not function in the interests of women, of blacks, of Hispanics, of minorities, of the educated, of anyone who is interested in a system of government in which one person has one vote. The Republican Party continues on an unending basis to add and make efforts to continue wars throughout the United States, wars of the police against minorities, against blacks, against justice. The Republican Party and its warmongering status contributing to the present crisis not being discussed by the political parties, not being discussed in any of the three debates. The attack on a city in Iraq, Mosul, the prepared attack by the United States military and Turkish forces and Iraqi forces and U.S. military advisors against a city with 300,000 plus civilians, 100,000 military on the side of the United States is going to invade and disseminate and destroy the city of Mosul in Iraq with 250,000 civilians in it. This is an atrocity being planned by the Obama administration, by the Obama government, by the Democratic Party, and is not being mentioned here today. That's what we're going to begin our program with. The question and the discussion of Mosul. Here is a map of Iraq and Syria. We'll be able to expand that map so that it's clearer and more easily visible to you at home. Important in this map are the structures clearly visible now is the parties involved. Turkey bombed People's Protection Units or Kurdish militia. The U.S. considers the most effective force against ISIS in Syria. Turkey has sent 2,000 troops into Iraq, where they are watching the massive military operation aimed at recapturing Mosul. What does Turkey have to do in Iraq? Why is Turkey sending troops to Iraq? This is Turkey. Here's Iraq. Here is Syria. How is it that Turkey moves from here into Iraq? Why is it that they are interested in fighting against Turkish fighting against forces of Kurdish militia? The reason why they are interested in fighting against Kurdish militia is that the Kurdish militia are a minority in Turkey, a people who go back in history 4,000 years, who have lived as a minority at times, in recent times, as a minority in Turkey. They are a proud people. They trace their ancestries back to a time in which Persia, the Empire of Persia, ruled all of what is now Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. The question is, why is Turkey entered into Iraq to fight against Kurdish militia, a military body working effectively with the United States against ISIS? The reason is Turkey is interested in catching the effective fighters of the Kurdish militia in a pincher movement to disseminate them, to kill them. They are not working. Turkey is not working in the interests of the United States to eliminate ISIS. Turkey is working against the interests of the United States, against the effectiveness of Kurdish militia, and against the interests of the United States, because Turkey is interested in gaining control of the entire area of Iraq, because the United States is using Turkey to manipulate the situation of refugees entering Europe. This is the crisis. Europe to Turkey. This is the crisis in front of you. The hundreds of thousands of individuals fleeing their homeland in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, all over the Middle East. People are fleeing their homes because of the wars conducted by the United States again and again and again. The effort which the United States now has in fighting against Mosul, an area in this part of Iraq, already Syria has been bombed by the United States and its allies in the city of Aleppo. Now the United States is focusing its attention to Iraq and Mosul. It's a continual bombing and killing and driving of civilians from this area through Turkey to Europe. Turkey is exactly on the border to Europe. Driving, creating wars in this area, Iraq, driving populations through Turkey or on boats, leaving then through the Mediterranean to get to England. This is the crisis which is taking place again by U.S. military forces, leading to the crisis of untold refugees, children, women, the elderly. Time and time again, the United States is implicating and initiating wars of destruction which drive civilian populations who are fleeing for their lives, who are fleeing the crisis created by the United States. Why is the United States doing this? The answer is, does anyone know? The Republican Party, under a Republican president, initiated this with a war against Afghanistan that is still going on 15 years later, the longest war in American history. A Republican president, George Bush, initiated the war against Afghanistan. 15 years later, the war is still going on. Initiated in 2005, 11 years ago. A war against Iraq still going on. The battle for Mosul, which is beginning now, a city occupied with 250 to 300,000 civilians, is going to be attacked by 100,000 Iraqi military, supported by the United States, financed by the United States. A bloodbath of Iraqis against Iraqis. Now, how is one supposed to understand this? Why do Iraqi soldiers think that it's justified to go to war against the Iraqi civilians, against their brothers, their sisters, their mothers, their fathers, their uncles, their grandparents, their daughters? Why is it that the Iraqi military has allowed themselves to go to this bloodthirsty war against their countrymen? That is the question that is not being answered by Donald Trump, is not being answered by the Republican Party, not being actually even talked about by the Republican Party. It's not being talked about by the Democrats. There was no discussion whatsoever in the debates about this reality. The crisis is unending. The United Nations calls for the protection of civilians as Iraq begins military operations to retake Mosul. That is the news here. That is the effort here for the United Nations that has no authority, that has no influence on the United States, making a call to avoid the slaughter of civilians. Related stories. UN agencies provide shelter, clean water for families displaced amid Iraqi's Mosul offensive. A surge in the diplomacy for peace would be my priority, the United Nations Secretary says. In turbulent Middle East, UN envoy warns against sleepwalking into another violent conflict. The UN mission in Afghanistan reports worrying rise in child casualties. The crisis does not end. The crisis against women and children, the crisis against the poor, continues with the interest of the United States in the foreground. It is the war the United States started with the Republican president, George W. Bush, against Iraq that was never made sense. It's not the Iraqi people that bombed the World Trade Center. It is the Saudi Arabian nation that bombed the World Trade Center. 17 of the 26 were Saudi Arabian nationals. None of those who were involved and identified were Iraqis. Why did we go to war against Iraq? The answer is clear. The answer is because Iraq had a socialist government. The nation of Iraq in 2000 had the most progressive government in the Middle East. There can be no question about it. They had a high standard of living, they had a good economy, and they had a socialist concept. That's the reason why the United States went to war against Iraq. Iraq had nothing whatsoever to do with 9/11. George Bush wanted to go to war against a socialist nation. That was Iraq. That's the reason why the American military was pushed and then went voluntarily into a war against Iraq. That's the reason why, again, the United States is preparing again for a war against the civilians in Mosul, in Iraq, because of the conflict of the Sunni and Shia, two religious organizations similar to the Catholics and the Protestants in the United States. The Catholics are Christian, the Protestants are Christian. It would be like the war of two Christian groups going to war with one another because of confession or because of the idea that God lives on star X instead of star Y, or that God does not want us to use contraception, or that God believes that divorce, excuse me, or that God believes that divorce is not possible, or that God believes that divorce is sinful. That would be the differences, perhaps, between Catholics and Protestants, which would lead to a war in the United States. Imagine that. Then imagine that taking place today in Iraq. Sunnis against Shia for exactly the same questions. They're just denominations within the Muslim world. It's the interest of the United States to pit Muslims against one another, to get Muslims to fight against, to kill their brothers, their sisters, their countrymen, to rape and pillage, to maim and to destroy, to set Iraqi military against Iraqi civilians. That's exactly what is taking place under the direction of the United States of America military today. It's criminal. It deserves to have a tribunal against the United States for conducting, preparing, and executing this war. And it's important to see that the war is being waged by Turkey. Turkey has sent troops. It says here, Turkey bombed the People's Protection Units, or the YPK, Kurdish military the U.S. considers the most effective force against ISIS in Syria. The U.S. is fighting against Syria here. Turkey is here. Turkish fighters are fighting in Syria. Turkish fighters that are a minority in Turkey. Turkey is attacking these PKK fighters in Turkey to catch them in a pincher movement against ISIS by capturing and killing PKK, killing Kurdish militia, because they are a minority in Turkey, and after they've had success in Syria, perhaps they will be allowed to form their own government in Iraq, which they own a portion of, or have taken over a portion of, in the north part of Iraq, where the oil wells are. They are capable of financing themselves, and Turkey is fearful that the success of the Kurdish militia here will allow them more autonomy and more financing for their position in Turkey. This battle is going on. Turkey has sent 2,000 troops, 2,000 Turkish troops into Iraq to fight against Turkish militia in Turkey and in Syria. This is a crisis that needs to be ended because of the civilian casualties which will take place further south in the city of Mosul, which is going to be attacked by Iraqi troops, killing their own countrymen. It's a civil war. The doings of the United States, the manipulation of the Republican Party, the manipulation of the Republican Party under George W. Bush, under the leadership of the Republicans, and now under the leadership of Barack Obama. Obama is as much implicated now for his continuing war against the peoples as a tide of human misery, it says in the Daily Mail. It's from today, 2016. A tide of human misery, 35,000 desperate Syrian migrants mass on the Turkish border as they try to flee carnage in their home country. Turkey has said it will send aid to the stranded migrants, but will only open its gates in event of an extraordinary crisis. Tens of thousands of the fleeing Syrians have amassed in 7 camps, which are already fully to bursting before influx. At an informal meeting in Amsterdam today, European Union policy chief urged Turkey to allow them to enter the country. Peace talks between the Syrian regime and opposition broke down this week because of Russian airstrikes in Aleppo. For more of the latest news on Syrian refugees, go to the Daily Mail. Arsonist torch hostels set to receive migrants in Calais as French police closing down the jungle clash with refugees after officials run out of buses to transport them. There's a massive crisis going on a gigantic crisis in Europe. We'll turn now to look at what the crisis in Europe is all about. The crisis in Europe has been brought about by the United States through the policy that it has used to create massive numbers of immigrants fleeing from the violence, fleeing from Iraq, on the map, from Iraq, the battles in Mosul, through Syria, through Turkey, into the European Common Union. We'll get a map of Europe to show basically what this looks like now. Here's Afghanistan, here's Iraq, here's Syria, here's Turkey. The Ukraine is much farther west. This is the Ukraine, is much farther west than Turkey. Again, on our map, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Ukraine. This is Russia. The immigrants, women and children, tens of thousands of them, were driven out of Iraq, through Syria to Turkey. Hundreds of thousands, as we've just recounted, 35,000 here in this area. Thousands, tens of thousands migrated here. Many of them drowning in their plight, in their trip, trying to get away from the crisis in Iraq, in Syria, fleeing on boats, entering Italy and moving towards France, or entering Spain from North Africa and going towards France, trying to get to Germany or France or the United Kingdom, and being blocked everywhere by police. In every one of these countries, the crisis has developed to send them back, to send people back to a country in which war and destruction is taking place. The bombing, the killing, the raping, the pillaging in all of these countries is taking place on a daily basis. Syria here, Aleppo in the north, here is Turkey. And Turkey has a pivotal role. Turkey is interested in getting support from the United States to become part of the European Union. It is not part of the European Union. It is interested in having trade rights with the European Union, but because of its poor civil rights record, its human rights record, its persecution of minorities, among other, its persecution and killing of the Kurdish fighters who are fighting with the United States against ISIS. We've mentioned this crisis taking place, refugees, hundreds of thousands of them. We've mentioned the crisis in the European Union through the settlements in which migrants, women and children, the elderly have reached France but are not allowed to stay there under the conditions. Tens of thousands more have been sent back. So from Iraq, where George Bush started the war in Iraq, through Syria, where the Democratic Party is continuing the war against the Syrians, the people then migrated through the Mediterranean or inland towards Germany, towards Poland, towards France. The idea of getting to the United Kingdom, not to mention the crisis that the United Kingdom is having. So, Nicola Sturgeon says Brexit meeting was deeply frustrating. Let's get a look at what Brexit is all about. Leaders of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland met Theresa May. This is Theresa May. She is the woman elected by the Parliament to create a message that England and the United Kingdom wants to stay in the European common market. But the vote that they had by the people in England was to leave the European common market, the European Union, to leave the European Union because of the migration crisis, because of the tens of thousands of Polish people, not Syrians, not Ukrainians, but Polish people who had gone to the United Kingdom. It was the Polish people who went to the United Kingdom that created the crisis which led to Great Britain, England to be specific, to exit the European Union. And Theresa May, appointed by the Parliament, the British Parliament, to establish the conditions under which England would leave or be able to continue some type of communication with the European Union. She had no success. Nicola Sturgeon says Brexit meeting was deeply frustrating. They have to go through a meeting. Theresa May has frustrated the leaders of Scotland and Wales by refusing to reveal any details of her plan for Brexit to assure them that tariff-free trade with the EU will continue. Nicola Sturgeon, the first member of Scotland, left the Joint Ministerial Council for the leaders of the home nations, saying she thought Theresa May did not have a coherent plan for how to take the UK out of the Union, of the EU. The United Kingdom has to exit. England has to exit the European Union. The question is, under what conditions will they exit? Why is that taking place? It's taking place because it's part of the immigration crisis, but it's not part of the immigration crisis of Iraqi and Syrian which are massing on the Turkey border. It's taking place because of the refugee crisis of Polish refugees going to England. This is England. This is Ireland. This is Scotland. This is Wales. This is Wales. This is United Kingdom, who have to leave the European Union because they voted to do so. Not because of the Syrian refugees, not because of Iraqi refugees, not because of Afghani refugees, but because of Polish people living rightfully, according to European Union, living rightfully according to the Union, Polish people living in England, upset the concepts that the United Kingdom, that the English people had about Polish people who have the right to migrate under the European Union, have the free passage of people, the free passage if you're a European Union citizen, you have the right to free passage to any of the 27 countries, any of the 27 countries, any of the 27 countries. If you're here and you're a member, you can move to any of the 27 other countries in the European Union. That upset England, that upset the United Kingdom, and they voted to leave the European Union because of that. They voted to leave the European Union. They voted on it, and now this woman, Theresa May, is trying to work out a deal with the European Union under the conditions under which that will take place. Why is this important? Why is this important? It's important because there is one country that profits from all of this. There is one nation that profits from all of this. It's the United States. The United States profits from this because it's become clear to the citizens of the United States through Bernie Sanders that we have the poorest healthcare, the poorest social system, the poorest unjust economic system, which benefits only the rich, which benefits only those in power. This reality explains why the United States is conducting the complete instability of the European Common Market. The EU, I'm sorry. The EU is being consistently and continually destabilized by the United States because of its success. The United States has the motive, the United States has the power, and the United States is conducting the wars together with Israel to drive a wedge, to create massive instability, to create hatred among the populations, among the populations, Sunni and Shia, to continue civil wars. The civil wars between Syria, Iraq, the conflict with Turkey and Turkish PKK forces Kurdish militia fighting against ISIS for the United States, and the destabilization of this entire area of the world, with, of course, the United States interested in launching a war under the Clinton administration against Iran. This is the target. Afghanistan is here with U.S. troops. Iraq is here with U.S. troops. Turkey is here. All of them have a border with Iran. All of them are now under United States control. The battle against Iran is being planned. Again, Iraq is under control of the United States military. Turkey works with the U.S. military. Afghanistan is under the control of the United States military. The target is Iran. The target that the Clinton administration has to solve is to create a further war to destabilize a highly civilized, highly sophisticated nation of Iran with massive oil resources. Why is this taking place? It's about the refugees. It's about the crisis being created in various cities in France, in Turkey, in Germany, to destabilize the European Union. The Brexit vote, the anger of and misunderstanding of the people of Great Britain in the fact that the Polish people, because they're part of the European Union, have the right to migrate there to go to work. This led to a movement within Europe to leave the European Union, and this is the crisis that's continuing now. What we can say in reference to all of this is elect the Green Party, elect Jill Stein. The reason why that's important to elect the Green Party is because it puts the power of democracy back into the hands of the people. The idea is to implement an emergency clean air, renewable energy powered by the sun, to implement a just transition that empowers communities and workers most impacted by climate change. That is what is not being discussed in all of this. The idea is to create a massive, the idea of all of this is to destabilize the Middle East with wars, destruction, and the conquest of all of the oil resources. We will remember in the year 2000, the United States had no wars against Iraq, against Pakistan. With the Republican Party, the wars against Pakistan and the wars against Iraq began. Now we have wars against Syria. So we have wars against Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, and we're preparing under the Clinton administration, most certainly, the next nation, the nation of Iran. That is, under the Obama administration, the problem of nuclear research was eliminated because of the idea that when the United States went to war with Iran, that Iran would not have nuclear weapons. That's the crisis. The crisis is when the United States goes to war with Iran, it doesn't want Iran to have nuclear weapons. So the war has been planned by taking over Iraq, taking over Afghanistan, having Turkey as an ally who is directly on the border of Iran. We have Turkey, Iraq, and Afghanistan all surrounding Iran. That is the idea. The idea is to go to war with Iran and take over their massive oil centers. Iran is a highly civilized, very sophisticated nation. Iranians are highly educated and have a very high standard of living. Why go to war against a nation that has only tried through research to defend itself because it saw that the United States went to war against Iraq, that the United States went to war against Afghanistan, occupied these nations, is continuing a war against Syria, creating massive conflict and immigration crisis throughout Spain, France, Germany, Poland, United Kingdom, with riots and problems, refugee crisis everywhere, with fleeing civilians. Who is it that profits from this? It's clear. It's the United States who profits from this. And the answer to this has to be in the election that takes place to elect Green Party members, to elect not the Democrats and not the Republicans, but to create a 5% margin for the Green Party, the party that would make it clear that not oil, that not further wars of destruction, of migration crises, of wars against Sunni and Shia, of civil wars, of wars against brothers and sisters, of wars against, to make the comparison, wars of the Middle Ages between Catholics and Protestants, it's the same degree. Between Sunni and Shia, it's the same question. They're both Muslims. They have slightly different ideas about Muhammad. They have slightly different ideas about the saints. We're speaking about Muslim saints. These ideas are ridiculous to our way of thinking, but they are seriously entrenched in the nations of Iraq, Syria, Iran, and that is the reason why they are vulnerable to manipulation by the United States, especially when the United States invests billions, hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars to subvert these nations, to subvert and create differences, violence against minorities, Shia killing Sunni, Sunni killing Shia, nations tearing itself apart without any idea of why these things, without any sense of why they're taking place. And a massive crisis taking place, a European crisis of nations migrating, fleeing their homes. The solution to this is to vote for the Green Party. It's clear that Donald Trump is someone that no one can vote for. Don't give your vote to the Democratic president candidate, because of the wars that America continues to direct through the Democratic Party into the nation of Iraq, into the nation of Syria, to manipulate the entire Middle East, to create massive numbers of refugees, massive numbers of migrants fleeing from the crisis taking place. Give your vote in 2 weeks' time to the Green Party. Let us establish a new priority to work on energy systems at home, not to use the oil, which has been responsible for so many wars, deaths, and destruction. We have the responsibility. We are the nation driving this crisis. Vote for Jill Stein. Give your vote to Jill Stein, and not to Clinton, not to the wars that Clinton will prepare against other nations in the Middle East. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you again next Monday. Go to vote. Vote for Jill Stein. Thank you.